I am Jane Honickman, and I am pleased to present to you Perinatal Mental Health and Grandparenthood. The goals of this course on perinatal mental health and grandparenthood are to understand the historic changes in roles and recognition of grandparenthood. 2. To explore nuances, roles, and traditions in different cultures. 3. To examine and understand practices and the roles of the nuclear and extended family. And 4th, to explore inclusivity and diversity to understand barriers and challenges. We begin with this quote because it reflects an unspoken truth about becoming a grandparent. Hello, Jane. I am 63 years old and am currently in therapy over the last 8 years for my own postpartum depression experienced 25 to 30 years ago, which was triggered by the birth of my first grandchild, who is now 3 years old. I was given your name by my therapist. Becoming a grandparent is a complex topic that has ripple effects. I am motivated to share this course with you because I have also been emotionally impacted by becoming a grandparent. The perinatal period is the ideal time to engage individuals from different generations to explore and develop a common ground in their families. There's a need to build bridges between old and the young during pregnancy and beyond. In these photographs, my mother is surrounded by her grandchildren in 1990. In 2010, I am surrounded by mine. The truth is that one grandchild is missing from each picture. My firstborn daughter was adopted into another family after her birth in 1966, as was my firstborn granddaughter in 1996. My daughter and I had had unplanned pregnancies, and we both relinquished our firstborn babies. These decisions delayed my introduction to both motherhood and grandparenthood. At the time, I had no idea that the pain from these experiences was, in fact, mental health trauma. I did marry the father of our first daughter, and we became parents to a son and another daughter. It was the 1970s, and a decade of social change and activism. I became a co-founder of the support organization for new parents in my community. It is called Postpartum Education for Parents. We launched a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week warm line and parent discussion groups in 1977. The founders used the adjective postpartum to describe the focus of the services we provided in our community. We agreed that the transition from birth through the first year of parenthood was difficult and challenging. The concept of promoting free emotional support provided by trained parent volunteers was very unique. PEP received media attention, and that led to my career in parental mental health. In the 1980s, I began to attend international postpartum conferences organized by the Marseille Society. This exposure led me into the medical world of psychiatric illness. The leaders of the postpartum scientific community defined the adjective postpartum to be through the infant's first year in order to set a time limit on their research efforts. In 1987, I combined my experience with peer-led social support advocacy with PEP and what I had learned from the researchers in the Marseille Society to start a new organization called Postpartum Support International. The definition of the word postpartum remained the same. My life's journey now spans over 7 decades, and I no longer believe that the definition and use of the word postpartum should have a time limit. My emotional responses to the perinatal period beginning in the 1960s have continued throughout my life, reaching into grandparenthood. This includes watching the pregnancies and postpartum adjustments of my own children. They continue because when the process for nurturing others begins, it does not stop. The transitions and adjustments continue forever. The title of this course on perinatal mental health acknowledges that all generations are emotionally impacted by conception, through pregnancy, at birth, into the postpartum period, and forever. We change for many reasons as we age, therefore we need to embrace all of life's stages. It makes complete sense to me to say that postpartum is forever. As we stated in a previous slide, the goals of this course are to explore, examine, and understand grandparenthood. The following questions will be covered based on the review of research literature from anthropology, sociology, psychology, and geriatrics. Data from national opinion polls and results from controlled studies are also included. The 8 questions are: Number 1, why are grandparents playing a major role in rearing the next generation? 2, how has human evolution shaped grandparental behavior? 3, how is grandparenting different from parenting? 4, how do lineage, gender, or marital status influence grandparenting? 5, how does grandparental involvement affect the well-being of children? 6, how is this different when they are caring for them full-time? 7, how is contemporary grandparenthood shaped by cultural patterns? And finally, 8, what are the social policy implications? Grandparents are the parents of mothers and fathers. They can be genetically linked to their offspring or through remarriage and be called step-grandparents. Becoming a grandparent is based on luck and life expectancy. It is part of one's life course and an extension of parenthood. It is about aging and birthing another generation. Sometimes grandparenthood is welcome, while other times it can cause pain. Since the start of humanity around 30,000 years ago, the number of humans who live to be grandparents has increased. Longevity is largely the result of improved medical technology and healthy living standards. The fact is that family knowledge, information, and wisdom are passed down through our grandparents to help to preserve us. It is believed that the reason to have 3 generations living together is for survival. Researchers have concluded that grandparents are consequential family actors who, by conditioning parent-child dynamics, influence the long-term emotional well-being of their grandchildren. Here are 3 specific points. Number 1, early family relationships play a pivotal role and may protect young adults against mental health risks. 2, risk factors such as poverty, marital conflict, and stressful life events may intensify the negative effects of parental depression on children. And 3rd, school-age children whose mothers suffer from depressive symptoms are at high risk for major depression, anxiety disorder, conduct disorder, substance abuse, and learning difficulties. This slide shows my maternal great-grandmother's Lotta holding her newest grandbaby, my Uncle Bob, with my mother Beatrice standing beside them. Next to them, I am being held by my maternal grandmother Emma. My grandmother moved in when I was born and lived with our family until her passing 15 years later. Historically and in all cultures, female relatives, especially the pregnant woman's own mother, have traditionally been important sources of support during the childbearing and child-rearing years. Research from anthropology validates that humans have evolved adaptive social cultural perinatal relationships. The literature reveals that grandparents provide significant contributions to the health and the well-being of their reproductive age daughters and grandchildren. In biology and sociology, the word alloparenting describes a system in which individuals other than the actual parents act in a parental role. One common form of alloparenting is grandparenting. In my case, it was my maternal grandmother. There are 3 domains in which grandmothers or other alloparents contribute. Number 1, demonstrating how to mother. 2, breastfeeding support. And 3rd, postnatal health and well-being. In addition to those 3 domains, there are 3 important forms of social support that are significant during the perinatal period. These are 1, instrumental, direct or indirect, 2, informational, and 3rd, emotional. As mentioned before, these provide aid to 1, establish the mother-infant bond, 2, buffer maternal energy balance, and 3, improve nutritional outcomes for the infants. The neurobiological and neuroendocrine underpinnings of allo-maternal caregiving continue to be studied. From an evolutionary perspective, cooperative parenting may have offered critical advantages for human survival and reproductive success. During the 1960s, the women's movement brought change to Western cultures, to our attitudes about pregnancy, birth, and the perinatal period. This social development meant that partners, older children, and grandparents were invited to be more involved. In this slide, my husband's parents, Dina and Alfred, are examples. It was a shift away from the traditional role of grandmothers only. By the end of the 20th century, grandparents were being recognized as important sources of support and stability in the face of major family upheavals. In a 1985 article on Creating Grandparenting, Bonding the Generations, acknowledges the quote-unquote feelings of grandparents. This was seen as part of a growing awareness about the impact of grandparents on the family system. Studies show that grandparental support for expectant families can strengthen the family system. It does so by 1, widening the circle of support and nutrients, 2, sustaining the sense of membership and belonging, and 3, coping with such roles changes as the roles, 2, communication patterns, and 3, daily living activities. There were studies and articles during the 1980s that focused on emerging grandparenthood roles that appeared in the popular press. Society was witnessing changing demographics of intergenerational relationships and expressed interest in grandparental roles. Here are some quotes from the 1985 literature. In some cases, effects of grandparents can be felt simply by their presence, not their actions. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly what grandparents do. Perhaps knowing that grandparents exist and are available is reassuring to the younger generation. Researchers in 1998 article called Becoming a Grandparent, a longitudinal study of expectations and early experiences as a function of sex and lineage, stated that prior to their work, quote, strikingly little psychological research has been done on expectations and experiences of grandparenthood, end quote. Their study revealed 4 key points on the importance of grandparents. These are 1, grandparenthood and family continuity, 2, grandparents and interconnected lives, 3, family systems view, and 4, grandparents as family stabilizers. We know that well-developed social support networks bring family and kinship systems together. They can reduce stress, and ease the transition during the perinatal period. New parents are simultaneously grappling with their own recoveries and the fragile health of their newborns. The key to coping with this challenge is social support. During the perinatal period, there are 7 key facts that substantiate the benefits of social support and the consequences when it is absent. These are 1, Support during pregnancy, whether by kin or through social services, improves birth outcomes. 2. Support during pregnancy contributes to easier labors. 3. Social support reduces infant morbidity and mortality during the first year. 4. These effects are particularly strong among first-time and young mothers. 5. Emotional and instrumental support by spouses and kin are linked to higher rates of breastfeeding, initiation, and duration. 6. Social support is critical to women as they learn to breastfeed. And finally, 7. Social support plays a key role in reducing the incidence of postpartum depression. The transition to grandparenthood and its impact on grandparents-to-be begins with being told about the pregnancy. They are usually the first relatives to be informed. Their reactions may vary from happiness and joy to ambivalence and resentfulness. It can be very complicated for everyone involved. For example, the announcement of a pregnancy may reawaken 1. Feelings of their own youth, 2. The excitement of giving birth, 3. Memories of the parents-to-be when they were infants. On the other hand, they may be resentful since they have no control over an event that presents them with new role and new responsibilities. For example, the announcement of a pregnancy may bring up 4 key points: concern about interference, 2. Willingness to follow the lead of their children, 3. An effort not to be seen as meddlesome, and 4. May not want to be a regular part of the everyday support system requested by new parents. Regardless of their cultural background, older couples seem aware that part of their role is to provide help, even when they may not want to do so. Contradictions between what children say they want, such as tangible help, and what they actually want, for example, no interference at all, can place grandparents in a no-win situation. A 1990 study on grandparents' response to the news about a pregnancy found 12 factors, and I'm going to read each one. First, the age at which they become grandparents. 2. Their ability to deal with the loss of the capacity to reproduce. 3. Their advancing age, sometimes confusing age with impending grandparenthood. 4. Their responsibilities for parenting their own other children while becoming grandparents. 5. The care and responsibility for their own aging parents. 6. Their socioeconomic status. 7. Their financial circumstances. 8. Their cultural and ethnic expectations, values, and beliefs. 9. Their own experiences being grandchildren. 10. Their past relationships with their own parents as children. 11. Their comfort with their own sexuality. And 12. Their mastery of their own developmental tasks. Any change in family membership causes stress. This is especially true with the addition of a new family member. Parenthood as a transition implies change in status that affects the family members and requires considerable role change. The roles that grandparenthood include during this transition are 3. 1. Becoming a source of support. 2. Widening the network of nuances. 3. Providing a sense of membership and belonging. While transitions are considered a central part of the normal aging process, they do include anxiety, stress, and vulnerability. Emotionally, the entrance to grandparenthood can also express solidarity, affection, and pride. For expected couples during the transition to parenthood, the grandparents can 1. Buffer some of the stress and anxiety, or 2. Become a source of stress to the expectant couples over conflict between the grandparents' advice and that made by health care professionals. An example of help with these transitions for expectant grandparents were prenatal classes. Among the topics covered in a 1998 hospital-based class were 4 points that were covered: grandparental roles, grandparent anxieties, third, concerns, fourth, relationships with expectant parents. I've always wondered what this baby is thinking. Is it shocked, surprised, being coy, worried, or unhappy? In a 1999 article, Parental Education and Grandparenting, Creating an Interdependent Family Environment, explained that grandparents were becoming more involved due to the increasing rates of separation, divorce, and remarriage. There was growing opinion, public concern, and social trends about how these issues impacted and affected children. It is why grandparents were becoming more involved and important. By the end of the 20th century, men and women were spending almost half of their lives as grandparents, witnessing their grandchildren becoming adults. This will increase because by 2030, 1 in every 5 residents will be aged 65 and older. They are projected to outnumber children for the first time in the United States history. A paper titled Self-Concept as the Organization of Roles, Importance, Centrality, and Balance found that 3 points. 1. Grandparent role was among the most likely to be identified as important by middle-aged, working men and women, and typically more important than the role of worker. 2. For men, only the roles of parent and spouse were more important than being a grandparent. And third, for women, only being a parent and a friend were identified as more important. This slide shows my father with his brothers and their grandparents who lived long lives. They represent the mission of the International Longevity Center Global Alliance, the ILC, that was established in 1990. Their mission is to help societies to address longevity and population aging in positive and productive ways. The 16 Alliance member organizations carry out the mission through developing ideas, conducting research, and creating forums for debate and action in which older people are the key stakeholders. In 2017, their research in the United Kingdom revealed that the number of grandparents who provide childcare for their grandchildren had risen dramatically. The report found that over 9 million grandparents made up the UK's grandparent army, quote unquote, with nearly 3 million offering very regular care. 7 facts emerged. Number 1, grandparents spend an average of over 8 hours a week looking after their grandchildren. 2, this commitment time rises to over 11 hours weekly for those core grandparents who are most heavily relied upon. Third, 2/3 of grandparents offer financial contributions to their grandchildren's upbringing, across payments towards clothing, toys and hobbies, leisure activities, and pocket money. Fourth, some also pay for others to babysit so they and the parents can take a well-earned rest. 5, according to the most recent report, the major reason for grandparents' increased involvement is their children's workloads and pressure to keep their jobs or get a pay rise. 6, the vast majority, 96% of grandparent childminders, receive no payment from their children to cover the cost of looking after their little ones. 7, the report adds that grandparents are also spending over £400 each year for these children's activities while they are in their care, a colossal combined £3.8 billion. In a 2015 issue of the Daily Telegraph, published in London, the British Prime Minister Cameron highlighted the nearly 6 million unsung heroes who spend their days looking after their grandchildren, saving Britain more than 7 million billion pounds in childcare costs. This slide shows my wonderful father-in-law who lived to 99.5 years old. Here he represents the growing population in the United States of grandparents. They were surveyed in 2018 by the American Association of Retired Persons, also known as AARP, AARP. The national survey included 2,654 individuals between the ages of 38 and older, up to age 73 and older, by doing different kinds of questionnaires and interviews. They answered 21-minute questionnaires in English and Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. The objectives were to obtain in-depth and personal insight into grandparenting. Their executive summary says that 1. 50 years is the average age to have a first grandchild. This is an increase of 2 years since 2011. 2. The youngest grandparents are about 38 years old. 3. Since 2001, the number of grandparents has grown by 24% from 56 million to 70 million. 4. By the age of 65, 96% of adults are grandparents. 5. They are on average, they have 4 to 5 grandchildren. 6. By the year 2030, more than 70% of 8-year-olds in the United States will have a living great-grandparent. The fundamental grandparenting role remains the same, with grandchildren being respectful of their grandparents' wisdom and guidance. Grandparents provide a moral compass on issues such as education, morals, and values. In addition, they provide financially with gifts, supporting education and covering day-to-day costs. Grandchildren continue to refer to their grandparents by the traditional names of Grandma and Grandpa, yet 1 in 20 are referring to them by their first names. A December 2015 paper by the Pew Research Center called Parenting in America: Outlook, Worries, Aspirations found that the majority of grandparents view their parenting style to be superior to their parents. 1. Over half agreed that spanking is an effective form of discipline in comparison to only 4% of the parents. Another national survey conducted in 2018 by 0 to 3 included 1,000 grandparents from across the United States, with an oversampling of Hispanic and African American grandparents. The survey asked them about the joys, challenges, and needs of grandparents who care for grandchildren aged 5 and under. Grandparents participating in the online survey cared for grandchildren at least 15 hours a week. Approximately 1/3 shared a household among 3 generations. Here are 11 key points and the percentages from this survey that I'll read to you. Number 1, 98% love being a grandparent. 2, 94% love caring for their grandchildren. 3, 89% are satisfied with the current caregiving arrangement. 4, 8 of 10, the caregiving arrangement is not financial. 5, 89% like spending time with grandchildren on a regular basis. 6, 76% like getting to influence and shape their early experiences. 7, 74% like ensuring that their grandchild gets the best care. 8, 89% are happy with the quality of care they provide. 9, 70% say they have more patience. 10, 67% have a clearer sense of what's important than they did when they were raising their own children. And finally, 11, 74% agree it's scarier raising kids today because there's more danger and violence in the world. In an article called 21st Century Grandparents, Global Perspectives on Changing Role and Consequences, highlighted the increasing role of grandparents that they're taking in raising the next generation around the world. Their involvement is a demographic change referred to as quote-unquote gray dawn, D-A-W-N, and the color gray. For example, Finnish children born in 1860 shared an average 4 years of life with at least one grandmother and 1 year with at least one grandfather. For a child born in 1950, the corresponding amount of shared years had increased to 24 years with a grandmother and 13 years with a grandfather. In the United Kingdom, it is projected that by 2044, those aged 65 and over will represent 25% of the total population. Back to the United States, the 2018 AARP survey as a whole, grandparents are embracing multiculturalism. Key points. Number 1, a third have grandchildren of a different race or ethnicity. 2, fewer have identical race grandchildren. Third, nearly all grandparents say it's important that their different race or ethnicity grandchild knows about the heritage they share. And 4, 7 in 10 make an effort to help their grandchildren learn about the heritage that they do not share. And finally, today's grandparents are accepting of their grandchildren's different sexualities, with the majority saying they would support an LGBT grandchild. This next section is about the postpartum rituals and taboos in a variety of cultures. We know from decades of behavioral studies that grandmothers are the key providers of allomaternal care. Broader cross-cultural reviews have demonstrated that consistent and positive impact that the grandparents, and particularly maternal grandparents, have on child survival. Rituals and taboos function to limit the work that new mothers are permitted to do, allowing for help from others, particularly kin. A period of 40 days matches well with the needs of new mothers in terms of postpartum healing. Allocare providers offer a specific time set aside for rest and learning. This helps to establish breastfeeding and emotional bonding with the infant. Dana Raphael was an anthropologist whose 1966 dissertation showed that there was worldwide evidence of common postpartum rituals that prevent women from participating in productive labor or household chores. She found that it is universal for women to rely on others either directly or indirectly and to help raise their children. I learned from Dr. Raphael about mothering the mother, quote unquote, and the Greek word doula. It describes those who surround, interact with, and aid the mother at any time within the perinatal period. A biocultural study of grandmothering was published in the Journal of Human Nature and describes the value that help during the perinatal period has for any birth, but especially first-time mothers. They're likely to particularly benefit from the support of their maternal grandmother. As previously stated in humans, the key to coping with changes and challenges is social support. There are many perinatal cultural rituals and taboos. I've selected the following 10 examples from the anthropology research and literature. 1. In China, the period of doing the month allows mothers 30 to 40 days to recover after a birth, with considerable support from her mother or mother-in-law. 2. In Nigeria, new mothers are placed in a quote-unquote fattening room for 2 to 3 months after birth. There, they are cared for most often by their own mothers or when she is unavailable, by their mothers-in-law, and their only job is to rest, eat, and feed her baby. 3. Among the Martu, an Aboriginal group living in Australia's western desert, grandmothers not only provide significant amounts of direct care, they provide that care strategically. Martu grandmothers tend to do more high-risk, high-demand care, such as feeding, bathing, and soothing infants when they are distressed, and relatively less low-cost, low-skill care, such as holding the babies, which could be done by any number of helpers. 4th, in Indonesia, women reported that the making and serving of a medicinal soup stimulated breast milk. 5. In Thailand, mothers and mothers-in-law were responsible for passing on information about postpartum healing practices. 6. Sequestering mothers after birth with care from female kin is also seen in sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and South Asia. 7. In Japan, this custom, called home to the village to give birth, it requires women to return home during their 3rd trimester of pregnancy and stay through the early postpartum period. 8. In Fiji, women return to their natal homes to be with their mothers during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy and remain there until 6 to 8 weeks postpartum. 9. In Zimbabwe, expecting first-time women return home during the 3rd trimester and stay through the birth and the postpartum period. And 10. Among Bedouin Arabs, during the mandated 40-day seclusion period following the birth, women are visited frequently by their female kin, who bring food and gifts and help to relieve the new mother of her chores and help to care for the infant. As stated before, research on social support has shown that 1. Women who have positive relationships with their own mothers are more sensitive to their own infants. 2. Emotional support can also be instrumental for maternal and infant health. 3rd, women who reported having greater emotional support during pregnancy, which came mainly from their own mothers, delivered heavier infants. And next, shortened labors and reduced cesarean section deliveries. And last, social support associated with reduced maternal fatigue, 6 months postpartum, and improved breastfeeding practices. Basically, grandmothers and others can slow down an expectant mother's activities in the period preceding birth, can free up mothers with infant care, cooking, and other household tasks so that she can rest and recuperate after the birth. But what exactly is social support? As stated before, there are 3 important forms of social support that are significant during the perinatal period. These are 1. Instrumental, direct or indirect. 2. Informational. And 3rd, emotional. We have already gone over some of these examples, but now I'll state them again. Number 1. Instrumental support can reduce trade-offs for mothers between productive and reproductive efforts. This can occur with either direct infant care, allowing mothers more time to devote to production, or indirectly through labor substitution. This allows mothers to spend more uninterrupted time with their infants while still having their caloric demands met. 2. Informational support, especially during difficulties and challenges, relates to advice about breastfeeding and complementary feeding, information about infant care and safety, and assistance with diagnosis and treatment of health problems. Outside of the formalized healthcare system, women's mothers and mothers-in-law are routinely the key sources of information on these topics. And 3rd, emotional support is from their mothers and others during the perinatal period. In the early postpartum period, support relieves stress and anxiety and is related to greater satisfaction with parenting and competency during the child's infancy. In a study of grandparental support for babies in the United States Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, NICU, emotional support was listed by doctors and nurses and by the new parents as being the most critical type of support needed. 93 families participated in a survey of family members 1 month after the baby's born and 1 month after discharge to home. There was general consensus that the principal role of grandparents was to provide emotional support. More was expected of grandmothers than of grandfathers, and maternal grandmothers in particular were key figures. The 2016 United States Census data showed that 1 in 5 Americans living in multi-generational family households, which was the highest percentage since 1950. A multi-generational household is defined as including 2 or more adult generations or grandparents and grandchildren younger than 25. Asian American families were most likely to live in multi-generational households, 33%, followed by Hispanic families at 27% and African American families at 26%. The national survey conducted in the spring of 2018 by 0 to 3, which we referred to already, it included 1,000 grandparents who provided regular child care for grandchildren aged 5 and under. They were asked about the joys, challenges, and needs of sharing care. The results showed that grandparents in multi-generational households experienced more stress and a more complicated relationship with their grandchild's parents when reporting tension and disagreements. In Hispanic households, 60% of grandparents reported more tension between generations than did grandparents in the survey as a whole. They showed more interest in caregiving information and were more likely to search for that information on the internet. In African American households, these grandparents reported that their caregiving involvement was driven by their perceived role within the family as well as a sense of duty. For example, 59% of African American grandparents agreed with the statement that, quote, "It's my job to help my family if they need it," unquote. 37% of African American respondents also agreed with the statement, quote, "My grandchild's parents work non-traditional hours," unquote, as the reason for helping out. 70% of grandparents agreed that, quote, "My house, my rules," when it comes to caregiving for younger children. 65% of respondents shared that they do not think, 65% of respondents shared that they do what they think is right with their grandchildren, even if they think the grandchildren's parents will disagree. African American grandparents did not report higher levels of tension or disagreements with their grandchildren's parents than other groups. 75% say their grandchildren's parents look to them for child-rearing advice, and finally, 27% of the overall sample reported more challenges with practical matters like coming up with activities to enjoy together. In a European study titled "The Impact of Caring for Grandchildren on the Health of Grandparents in Europe," a life course approach used data from the Survey of Health, Aging, and Retirement in Europe. They investigated longitudinal relationship between grandparental childcare, both intensive and non-intensive, and health once cumulative histories of advantage or disadvantage were given. They found that positive longitudinal association between grandchild care and health, even after earlier life health and socioeconomic conditions were taken into account. However, the significant association was found only for the grandmothers and not the grandfathers. Further research is needed on the underlying mechanisms and causal pathways between grandchild care and grandparent health, as well as on gender differences in the pattern of association. We already know that maternal depression has been found to adversely affect children at all stages of life, even in utero. Research shows that depressed mothers tend to be inconsistent with the way they care for their children and how they show affection. This may come out as alternating between loving and being withdrawn or responding in a negative way. In order to understand current treatment practices and the different roles of the nuclear and extended family, I examined the social science literature on grandparenthood. From my review, 3 theories emerged: family systems, symbolic interaction, and intergenerational solidarity. The family system theory focuses on human behavior that defines the family unit as a complex social system in which members interact to influence each other's behavior. There are 3 key points from the literature. Number 1, family members interconnect, making it appropriate to view the system as a whole rather than as individual elements. Any change in one individual within a family is likely to influence the entire system and may even lead to change in other members. 2, the basic premise of a systems approach is that family members act interdependently in response to internal and external threats to family equilibrium. And 3rd, this broad and inclusive approach to family life has directed researchers to consider relationships beyond those between child and parent in order to more fully account for familial forces that shape children's development and adaptation. One study in 2006 titled "Breaking the Chain: How Grandparents Moderate the Transmission of Maternal Depression to the Grandchildren" analyzed data from 2,280 grandchildren and their mothers. They pulled from family systems theory to examine whether social cohesion with grandparents moderated the intergenerational transmission of depressive symptoms from the mothers to their adolescent and young adult children. The results revealed that 1, grandchildren who were less integrated with their grandparents resembled their mothers in the severity of depressive symptoms, and 2, grandchildren who were more integrated with their grandparents bore no such resemblance. Next, symbolic interaction theory is a social theory that focuses on the analysis of patterns of communication, interpretation, and adjustment between individuals in relation to the meaning of symbols. According to the theory, there are 5 key points. Number 1, an individual's verbal and nonverbal responses are constructed in expectation of how the initial speaker will react. 2nd, shared activities help to build emotional bonds. 3rd, interactionalist perspective emphasizes that families reinforce and rejuvenate bonds through symbolic rituals such as family meals and holidays. 4th, self-processes motivate individual behaviors and responses to roles. And 5th, individuals are not just passive role players, but actively strive to confirm and enhance self-conceptions. The authors of Grandparenthood: Factors Influencing Frequency of Grandparent-Grandchildren Contact and Grandparent Role Satisfaction analyzed data from 1997 that was collected from 203 middle-aged grandmothers and grandfathers. They examined 3 self-factors to the frequency of contact with grandchildren and grandparent and role satisfaction. These are: 1, grandparent identity meanings; 2, grandparent centrality; and 3rd, self-esteem. Consistent with previous findings, there are no differences in the grandparent role satisfaction for grandmothers and grandfathers, And further analysis revealed that gender does not independently influence grandparent satisfaction. The 6 key points of this theory are: 1. The more frequent the contact between grandparents and grandchildren, the more satisfied the grandparents are with their role. 2. None of the social background variables influence grandparent satisfaction. 3rd, self-variables independently influence grandparent satisfaction. 4th, the more positive a person's grandparent identity means, the more satisfied one is with the role. 5. The greater the centrality attributed to the grandparent role, the greater the grandparent role of satisfaction. 6. The greater one's self-esteem, the greater the grandparent role satisfaction. On to the next, the 3rd. Intergenerational solidarity theory refers to the degree of closeness and support between different generations. The notion of solidarity helps us to understand how people of different generations relate to, help, and depend on one another in their daily lives. This includes: 1. Affinity. It is about making links between levels of emotional closeness and consensus of opinions. 2. Opportunity structure. It's having contact to have the necessary conditions for exchange behavior. And 3rd, functional exchange, which is about providing and receiving assistance. Put together, affinity, opportunity structure, and functional exchange represent the potential of the family to support and sustain its members. The model holds that although social forces such as increased geographical mobility and rapid economic change act to separate the intergenerational family, affinity, opportunity structure, and functional exchange represent ways in which most modern families remain cohesive and integrated. A 2016 research study titled "Solidarity in Grandparent-Adult-Grandchild Relationship and Trajectories of Depressive Symptoms" used data from a longitudinal study of generations. This was a survey of 3- and 4-generation U.S. families that included 7 waves of data collected between 1985 and 2004. The sample was comprised of 374 grandparents and 356 adult grandchildren. They examined within and between family variability and the nature of the grandparent and the adult-grandchild relationship. The goal was to identify relational contexts that best promote the well-being of members of both generations. Their results showed that for both grandparents and adult grandchildren, that while greater affinity reduced depressive symptoms, more frequent contact increased symptoms. For those grandparents only receiving function support without also providing it had increased depressive symptoms. There is a growing body of research in family science literature that has investigated the value of grandparents, but gaps exist in understanding the role of grandfathers and its impact on men's development and well-being. This means there is an imbalance from an unequal sample of men and women that have been researched about how men age and masculinity. Additional barriers come from the 2018 ARP survey. They found that while distance and busy schedules are a challenge, grandparents are finding ways to spend time with and to connect with their grandchildren. Distance is the biggest barrier to seeing grandchildren. Over half of the grandparents have one grandchild who lives more than 200 miles away, and about a third live more than 50 miles from their closest grandchild. 4 in 10 grandparents today are in the workforce. Their busy schedules, as well as the schedules of their children and grandchildren, are the second biggest barrier to spending time with their grandchildren. These challenges are being overcome with increased technological savviness, more in-person opportunities with grandchildren, and travel with skip-gen travel, travel without parents, being experienced by a third of grandparents. Grandparents also seek additional information about connecting with their grandchildren and staying relevant in their lives. And last, grandparents welcome online media sources for grandparenting information, although they can also still consult traditional media. The 2018 0 to 3 National Survey of 1,000 grandparents from across the U.S. found that while nearly all those asked universally appreciated the experience of caregiving, income levels were not predictive of their satisfaction with their arrangements. There are differences, challenges, and areas of perceived stress when data was examined by subgroup. The key point is that caring for a young child can be exhausting. 2 in 5 grandparents say the job of caregiving is tiring. 1 in 5 say it is stressful. 48% felt some level of disagreement or tension concerning child care issues, and these were about 1. Handling tantrums, 2. Navigating mealtime, managing screen time. 74% leave the final decision of the grandchild's behavior to the grandchild's own parents. A 2019 paper called "A Second Chance at Being a Parent: Grandparents, Caregivers Reported Communication and Parenting Practices with Co-Residential Grandchildren" examined family communication patterns theory. They describe grand families as family structures in which no biological parent is present. They analyzed 21 semi-constructed interviews with grandparents and found 4 themes describing grandparents' reported communication practices. 4 are: number 1, creating opportunities for listening and dialogue. 2, talking about emotion. 3, emphasizing openness. 4, allowing questioning. There are 3 outcomes from the impact of second chance parenting for the grand families. 1, increased resources. 2, acquired wisdom. 3, matured emotionally. Similarly, grandparents who act as both parent and grandparent must meet their grandchildren's needs while navigating challenging family dynamics and facing their own mental and physical vulnerabilities. As such, the complexities surrounding the formation of grand families are often catalysts for stress and trauma in grandparent caregivers and their grandchildren. The University of Michigan Health and Retirement Study, known as HRS, is a longitudinal panel study that has surveyed a representative sample of approximately 20,000 people in America. It is supported by the National Institute on Aging and the Social Security Administration. The research on elevated depressive symptoms among caregiving grandparents had a national sample of 10,293 grandparents aged 53 to 63 years. These grandparents were surveyed in 1994 and then resurveyed every 2 years thereafter through the year 2000. Over that period, 977 had a grandchild move in or out of their home. These grandparents served as their own controls to assess the impact of having a grandchild in the home. The goal was to identify the unique challenges and expectations faced by custodial grandparents due to their non-traditional roles, while attempting to disentangle grandparental role demands from child-specific problems as sources of distress. They found that grandparents have a greater probability of elevated depressive symptoms when a grandchild is in their home versus when a grandchild is not. Of particular note, single women of color bear a disproportionate burden of the depression associated with caring for grandchildren. This cross-sectional study compared 3 groups of custodial grandparents. 1. Those raising problematic grandchildren. 2. Those raising quote-unquote normal grandchildren. And 3rd, non-custodial grandparents. Those grandparents raising grandchildren with neurological, physical, emotional, or behavioral problems exhibited the most distress, the most disruption of roles, and the most deteriorated grandchild-grandparent relationships. Although custodial grandparents raising apparently normal grandchildren demonstrated less distress, less disruption of roles, and less deterioration of the grandparent-grandchild relationship than those of the others displaying the problems, they still demonstrated higher such levels than did traditional grandparents. A 2003 review of research on the health of caregiving grandparents compiled data from 33 different studies dating from 1992 through the year 2002. I've divided the research's conclusions into 5 health categories: physical, mental, positive, negative, and no difference. There were 5 studies where grandparents reported fair or poor health, and some having a significant physical health problem. 4 studies showed individuals delayed or neglected getting to their own doctors. Although chronic health problems are associated with aging and are not necessarily related to caregiving, the exacerbation may result from caregiving stress. The themes reflect time and financial constraints imposed by caregiving. In one study, 33% of caregivers had not seen a physician in 3 years. One woman postponed her hip replacement surgery because there was no one to care for her grandchild. There were 7 studies in which some researchers reported that the physical health of the grandparents' caregivers stayed the same or improved while caregiving. Some grandparents reported becoming healthier after assuming the caregiving role because of a more active lifestyle. In one study, a quarter of a sample of 71 African American grandmother caregivers described improved health over the previous year. Others lost weight because of increased physical activity with the grandchildren and discontinued smoking out of concern for the children's health. A theme among those caregivers claiming to have excellent or good health emerges when evidence of health problems are reported in the interviews. These discrepancies may be attributed to the grandmother's fear that the children might be taken from them if they reveal their own health problems. In addition to problems with physical health, grandparent caregivers experience mental health problems. 12 studies revealed the majority of grandparents indicated they felt emotionally drained since caring for grandchildren. There were reports of African American grandmothers having worsening mental health in comparison with a normative group. Anxiety and depression were the most commonly addressed mental health concerns of this group. In a model of the stress process in caregiving, it is proposed that stress is a set of life circumstances and experiences that affect health and well-being. In one study, a grandparent caregiver's stress was found to be the strongest predictor of depression and self-assessed health problems. Common sources of stress included alterations in the grandparents' lives as a result of raising a grandchild because they had to alter their usual routines and plans, and a decrease in time available for recreational activities and friends. One of the themes in a study of 6 African American grandmothers was that of personal sacrifice. Sacrifices included not being able to continue their education and spend time with partners and friends or elderly parents. A sense of social isolation followed these changes in grandparents' lives. Reasons for marital problems included husband's jealousy about time spent with grandchildren, decreases in privacy and sexual activity, and more tension and arguing. One study reported that none of the grandparent caregivers' marriages had improved. and a third experienced some negative change. Although many grandparent caregivers experience psychological problems, positive aspects of the caregiving experience have been described. In a study of African American grandmothers, 28% reported having excellent mental health. An overwhelming number of the 717 grandmother caregivers in another study indicated that they had greater feelings of self-esteem and attributed this to helping their grandchildren. Caregiving grandparents also indicated that their grandchildren brought them joy and love. Grandmother caregivers experienced less worry for the grandchildren's safety than they were no longer in the care of neglected biological parents. Some studies report no serious marital problems and no difference in marital adjustment between the guardian and the non-guardian grandparents. Perhaps most significant to mental health were the benefits expressed by grandparents who indicated that caregiving gave them an increased purpose for living. Dr. Renee Miller, who's a perinatal clinical psychologist and the founder of an antenatal and postnatal psychology network in Melbourne, Australia, wrote a 2017 editorial based on informal survey of new parents and grandparents. And I quote, "The birth of a baby brings about significant changes to new parents, changes to their identities, their life responsibilities, and their relationships. The same can be said for new grandparents. At a time when they may be appreciating a newfound freedom, new grandparents face a reorientation towards participating in their children's and now grandchildren's lives." Here are 6 key points she makes. Number 1, new parents are exhausted, vulnerable, and desperate for physical and emotional support. 2, they can hold expectations based on assumptions they haven't verbalized. 3rd, new parents can feel disappointed when these expectations are not met. 4th, new grandparents' own ideas about their roles can be confusing. 5th, some grandparents feel shut out of their grandchildren's lives. And 6th, some can feel overly responsible to be available at all times. The overall conclusion of this course is that all societies, academics, clinicians, leaders, and family members need to reevaluate the role of grandparents, pay attention to the support they need, and systematically integrate kin and grandparental care into family policies. Thank you for listening. And I end with a personal slide of a family reunion on my father's side, taken many years ago. There are multiple generations since this slide. Thank you.